Welcome to the Care Right podcast, your go-to resource for all things elder care. Guiding us through this journey is Annalee Kruger, the founder of Care Right Incorporated, and she has been steadfastly supporting families across the United States. Each episode brings you expert insights, innovative strategies, and practical advice, ensuring that you're well equipped to provide the best possible care for your loved ones. Expect to gain valuable knowledge, learn from real-life stories, and get inspired to take action in your own caregiving journey. So buckle up as we dive into an in-depth discussion of elder care planning and together embrace the journey of caring for aging loved ones on the Care Right podcast.
With the AMR team of Wealth Enhancement Group, glad to have you joining us for another episode of Something More with Chris Boyd. You're going to love this one. We have a great guest, Annalee Kruger from Care Right Inc. And Annalee is one of the co-founders of the Certified Elder Planning Specialist program, which is how we got to know each other. Recurring guest for us. Been a while since you've been on, but been on the show before. Glad to have you back, Annalee. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for asking me, Chris and Jeff. I appreciate it.
So, Annalee, just to tell our audience, if they haven't heard you on in the past, tell a little bit about your company and what it is you do, because I think that's going to set the stage for what we're going to talk about today.
It will absolutely set the stage. I used to be a social worker and executive director in continuing care retirement communities, the communities that have all the different levels of care. Did that for 22 years. Every day had families in my office to do a tour because mom's in the hospital and the kids get the message from the hospital that says, go find a facility by noon tomorrow because we're discharging. And that's how it happens every single day, every single time. And the families are always blindsided. The kids had no idea what questions to ask, what to look for during the tour. So they were just totally like deer in the headlight look. Then when I would ask them, do your parents have a living will, power of attorney, long-term care insurance? What's their code status? Is your dad a veteran? All these things. They're like, I don't know. Our family never talks about stuff like this. And then there were like this many families who would say, you know, Annalee, we tried to get this information from mom and dad, but they gave us so much pushback that we quit trying. And so in 2011, I left corporate America because I'm like, wow, these families are falling through the cracks of our healthcare model. And I always say model because to me, a system implies efficiency and effectiveness. That is not that. So that's why I call it a model. So yeah, that's a poke at my own industry. But anyway, that's what it is. That's so fair. In 2011, I left corporate America to start Care Right Incorporated to solve for all those problems of families not having family meetings, families not understanding the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, families not understanding that assisted living is not the same as nursing home, and they don't understand dementia progression at all either. And so I built a company to solve for all those issues so that families don't find themselves as caregivers who have allowed caregiving to derail their careers, their finances, their marriages, their emotional, physical health, and their relationships with their siblings and their parent. So I started a national virtual consultancy way back in 2011 because families just don't live down the street from each other anymore.
Right. Oh.
And so that's why I went virtual right away. And families can't just keep leaving work to fly from California to Texas or wherever their parents live to meet with a specialist or an expert. So I was like, well, no, you don't have to fly anywhere. We do this at your desk on Skype because that's what we had back then. So that's a good segue into the typical profile of families these days. So 30 some years ago, when I started working with families, you know, it seemed like families got along a bit better than they do now. And this is why, because they live down the street from each other. And when you have that closer proximity, it seems like there was more ability for them to resolve conflicts and work together as a team. Now, that said, no family is without their stuff, right? Like most families have stuff, but it just seems like 30 years ago, I wasn't doing as much mediation as I am since, the family started moving away from each other. And it's true, or it seems to be true in my line of work, that if you as a family drift apart and you move away from each other, if you don't invest the energy, the time, the effort, and the resources in maintaining relationships with each other, whether it's virtual on now Zoom or getting together, you drift apart. And especially if there was, brother Tom said something stupid at Thanksgiving 25 years ago, and now the whole family relationship is cracked. Then when mom has a stroke and she's the primary caregiver to dad with dementia, the kids are like, "Ugh, we have to get reacquainted with each other and then figure out what to do with mom and dad." And they have no idea what to do with mom and dad. So that's what we solve for with our consultancy.
And Lee, I think you're right. In one respect, I'll add some commentary is that families, because they were closer together, spent more time together, and
Yep.
not just the time is quality, but the time you spend with someone who may show some early signs, and we want to talk about those early signs, but you see them more obvious. If you spend 10 minutes with somebody, most people are very good at hiding their
Mhm.
deficiencies, but if you're spending hours together and frequently seeing them, you're more likely to see these signs a lot earlier than maybe we see today. Is that true?
That I absolutely agree with that. It's hard to catch the red flags or be aware of the red flags that maybe your parents are failing instead of
Hmm.
thriving at home, and it's hard to see those when you don't live down the street anymore, or you have to see your parents only once a year or every other year. It's hard to catch those red flags because you're absolutely right, Jeff. They can, especially with memory impaired folks, they can cover pretty well for a few
Right.
minutes, especially in those early stages. And so when you also take into consideration that a lot of these seniors, our aging loved ones, can be pretty protective of each other, like, as their spouse. They're like, well, I don't want my kids to know that their mom is really struggling with memory issues, or that I'm struggling taking care of her. And so they tend to be pretty private and protective. But
Right.
what that really does is, then when the kids realize that something is wrong, like mom is wandering away, or dad is the primary caregiver and he just had a stroke because he's burned out taking care of mom with memory impairment because she has her days and
Care of
nights mixed
herself.
up,
Yeah. Yeah.
or she's wandering out of the house every 7 minutes and he just can't sleep, or he can't bathe because he always has to keep an eye on her. um, when families find out that, oh, things really have been failing at home, the kids feel terrible. They're like, if we would have only known, we could have just stepped in more. So I'm
Right.
really excited about this podcast, because this is a really good opportunity for your listeners. If you have aging parents, like, none of us get healthier as we age, right? Like, we don't get stronger, we don't get more mobile, we don't get more cognizant, we don't get more independent as we age. So it's only kind of common sense that if you have aging parents, we should probably be talking sooner rather than later, because the red flags of your parents not doing well are things like weight loss. Well, if you're only calling your parents and not doing a Zoom or a,
Yeah.
sort of video thing, then you're blindsided when you get there and you're like, oh my gosh, mom's lost 30 pounds. We had no idea because we only just talked to her on the phone. Other red flags: urinary tract infections.
Hmm.
So many parents have those. Elderly people get those very, very easily. And it's usually, these are all signs that they don't have enough supports in place, or things are not going well. Hospitalizations, ER visits, falls. They just can't keep up their house anymore because maybe they have pain issues or mobility issues, or they're not exercising. And so they're weak and they're just kind of plunked down in front of that recliner in front of TV, and that's how they spend their day. And they're not eating properly, so they're eating, maybe mom has shortness of breath because she has congestive heart failure and she's too weak to be able to balance and stand too long with a walker, and so she's not going to cook a meal. She's going to eat Twinkies and Cheetos and the stuff that I eat. She's going to grab what's ever easy. And so those are red flags that your parents are heading in the wrong direction. But we also need to just be plain and simple cognizant that we don't get stronger as we age. So it only makes sense that we put an aging plan in place with families sooner rather than later. My best efforts at trying to reach families proactively to say, hey, you've got these red flags. Mom's lost weight. She's the primary caregiver to dad with dementia. Mom's not getting her hip surgery because she's like, well, I can't be, I don't have time to recover because I have to take care of your dad. And, these are all indicators that things are going sideways, and you will find that your situation is a house of cards. And so ideally, families start working with us proactively and say, hey, you know what? I have aging parents. I heard this podcast. This really hit home for me because I can't be there all the time. Or conversely, I have to keep stepping away from work, or my spouse is finally saying, look, I love your parents, but like, you better figure something out because I'm done paying for you to fly to Arizona at $1,000 a pop every time mom falls and you have to go figure out what to do next. So those are red flags of things not going well. 92% of my clients come to us in total crisis mode, caregiver overwhelm and burnout, because they either ignored or they just didn't know that their parents were failing. And so that's why I do so many of these different podcasts, is to say, look, we need to wake up and say, we've got parents, or if you're the parent listening to this, say, look, I want to have a say in what happens to me as I age. And I don't want to end up having to have my kids make all these decisions on my behalf. I want to be an active participant in my aging plan. And so that's why I really appreciate this opportunity.
Annalee, would you elaborate on what you mean by an aging plan?
Yeah, so an aging plan is what we do at CareRight. It addresses about 25 different components of aging. So aging, family caregiver burnout, preventing family caregiver burnout. If you're already burned out, how to resolve those burnout issues. We do family mediation because 92% of our families come to us in crisis. 85% of those families, I'm doing family mediation with them because of family relationship strain. So we talk about, a lot of it is really education. What is working well at home? What is not working well at home? What are the goals? Mom and dad's goals are always to age in place at home and not be a burden on my kids. But it's always the adult kids who are calling me for an aging plan because they are burned out and burdened. The adult kids, when I ask them what their goals are, because my client's the whole family. And so when I ask the adult kids, what are your goals for your parents? It's always a variation of the same thing. Even when they're really overwhelmed and burned out and kind of resentful, it's still always the same thing. I want my parents to be safe. And I want my parents to be happy, and I want my parents to have the best quality of life and the best quality of care possible. The only logical way to make that happen, marry those goals of moms and dads and the kids, is to put a plan in place. One of the key parts of also what we do is what's called the Care Matrix Project. So we talk about, that's great that you want to age in place at home, but how do you have the finances to actually do that? My clients that are aging in place at home, they're spending roughly $30,000 to $60,000 per month in 24/7 care at home. And when families hear those numbers, and that's why we do the care matrix, so that they have exact numbers for their locations, they're like, well, how can that possibly be? So we'll take my parents as an example. My dad is 6'4", tall guy, army guy, so he's super buff and strong. My mom, when she was alive, she was only 5'2", but she was also obese, diabetic, and had early onset dementia and was wandering around. She'd get her days and nights mixed up. So when my dad had his stroke, he alone would have needed 2 people, because these caregivers, they're not football players.
Right.
So he would have needed 2, and then my mom would have needed 1 to 2 because of her sundowning behaviors and having her days and nights mixed up. She would have needed 2 people to redirect her and get her where she needed to be so she wouldn't wander out of the house. That's 4 people. That's how that adds up so fast. And
Right.
that's provided there's even care available where you live. There's a massive national shortage of
Mhm.
quality healthcare workers. And that's one reason why many people are not able to age in place at home, not only because of the cost, but also because of the availability of workers. And that's when families end up making those knee-jerk reactions of moving mom and dad in their house with them, and then find out, oh my God, what have I done? I'm in over my head. My house isn't senior safe. I didn't know that mom was incontinent and now my house smells like a nursing home. So people make all sorts of rash decisions when they don't have an aging plan to kind of guide them and steer them through everything.
And Lee, can we go back a bit to after the red flag? So you have a child or a family member who is starting to see these red flags and growing concerned. Um, what's the best way to approach the parent in this case? The
Subject. Yeah. To
because you
address it.
don't want to shut them down, right? You don't want to be confrontational. You're probably pretty emotional, scared, or all these emotions that you're feeling. What's the
Yeah.
best way to approach?
Isn't there also an inclination to minimize some of these issues that a spouse is somewhat protective of the dignity of
Mhm.
the spouse who may have some issues that they don't want to share that or reveal some of those realities.
Right. So,
Exactly.
yeah. So you've seen the dent in the car,
Yep. The
the weight
car,
loss, the house is a
the
mess.
house is a mess. The house smells like a nursing home.
Right.
All the red flags are always
But you
there.
can't say like, what the heck happened to the
So
car?
right. So that's why families benefit from having us as a neutral third party person, because then we take them through and coach them through, this is how you broach these topics with mom and dad. You can say things like, mom and dad, I love you, but we're in uncharted territory. We want the best for you. We want you to be safe and happy here at the house or wherever it is that they are, but we're in uncharted territory. We don't know what all we need to be thinking about so that we can be putting a plan in place to help you be safe and happy and comfortable at home. You can leverage things like, well, you work with a financial planner, so you have the intellect or the mindset of working with a professional to put a financial plan in place. Well, CareRight does aging planning and it's comprehensive, and they will follow you all the way through the rest of your caregiver journey if that's of interest to the family, or if they just want that aging plan. Most families stay on services until their parents pass away, though, just because that aging process is bumpy. So you can leverage like their mindset when they were more well and had maybe more clarity. So you could say the same thing with estate planning. Well, mom and dad, just like you have an estate plan in place, you've got your legal plan, you've got your financial plan, or maybe also have long-term care insurance. That's great. But the missing piece of all of that is the aging plan. Because even with all of those professionals in the picture and on the team, and even with a long-term care insurance product, that doesn't help when the daughter is burned out and overwhelmed,
Are
right?
you talking to the parents during this process? Or are you strictly
Yep.
working with the loved ones?
So both. So my client's the whole family, but we do staggered family meetings because I don't start out with mom and dad in on the Zoom calls with the kids, because I don't know what their family dynamics are.
Right.
And no parent wants to hear or see their kids fighting about them, whether we're in the living room or on Zoom.
Well, it's the last thing they want is strife,
That's right. So
which in
I know
part
the
is why they're
kids.
hiding it, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so we also, part of that aging plan is, educating the family so they're making smart decisions, so that, for example, they don't say, well, because they don't know what they don't know, and they'll break the bank, so to speak, trying to keep mom or dad at home. And then when they realize, oh, this is way more expensive than we thought, or, oh, we don't have quality home care company workers in our area, or they've called in too many times and now dad's been without a caregiver for 12 hours and he fell and all that kind of stuff. And then what happens is they break the bank, or parents are now too debilitated to get into like an assisted living, or now they have to look at Medicaid and then look at nursing homes. And then that's when parents end up separated, because mom's in one facility and dad's in another, and then they don't usually get to see each other. And so it's not only a financial aging plan where families need to understand the landscape of senior care, But they also don't understand that a lot of these good quality care communities might have a 3 to 5 year waiting list. So what's your plan if you have a stroke tomorrow and you don't have the 30 to 50 to $60,000 a month in your budget to pay for care, to wait to get into a care community? Most families aren't even on a waiting list. And that's why we do that care matrix. So families can understand these are the levels of care that these communities in your area offer. Here's what their state survey findings look like. We had we have families all across the country, but we do about 70 of these community care matrix projects a week for families all across the country. And it might take us, we often have to expand the matrix project because so many of these care facilities are being cited for abuse and neglect because of the turnover in workers. There was massive leadership changes, and families don't know they don't know how to do the due diligence because they're usually coming in crisis and they have to go wherever there's an open bed, and then that's not good.
So ideally, when would you like to meet with people?
Now, like this
Now.
very moment, because this is why, because all the people that had strokes last Thursday didn't wake up thinking, oh, I think I'm going to have a major stroke today. Or the daughter who's the primary caregiver who goes into the doctor for, what she thought was a stomach ache and then finds out she's got stomach cancer. Life just has these types of agendas, and we have to be prepared for the what whens and the good and the bad and the ugly of life in general. So the time is now, because the other problem is, and that's why we do comprehensive aging planning, is most of these families, when they come to us, they don't have any of their documents in order. They don't have their living will, their power of attorney, or they thought that their parents had it, and then parents never went back to the attorney and got it signed because dad fell again and he was in the hospital. So everything is pretty much a mess. Even when they come to us from, other professionals, there's just all these gaps because not professional, one professional can't know everything. That's why I always try to get people to work as a collaborative team and say, look, you have expertise that I don't, but I have expertise that you do. And we really need to make these families, we need to help prevent these families from ongoingly falling through the cracks.
Just wanted to make mention that if you're finding this conversation valuable, you may want to check out Annalee's book, The Invisible Patient. Could be a great resource for you as you are maybe planning, if you have the opportunity to plan a little bit ahead, so you're not one of these families in crisis.
And
also, I just had a quick question too, because a lot of people are like, well, this sounds great, but how do I get mom and dad on board? So I just had a couple more thoughts on that too. Not only leverage this podcast, but you can absolutely buy my book, The Invisible Patient. There's a lot of really good conversation starters in there. That book is jam packed with bullet point after bullet point of just tried to smother as much as I could in 120 pages of these are the things, the down and dirty, that you need to know if you're aging or have aging parents. But you can also leverage a hospital stay and say, we made it through this crisis okay-ish, but it really made us aware of how ill prepared we are on, you can go back home this time, but what's the plan if you can't go back next time? Or leverage something terrible that happened to a friend or a neighbor or another relative and say, how Aunt Sue, her dementia, everybody thinks that they have more time to plan, and her dementia went really fast, and we don't want that to happen to our family. We want to be more equipped so that you can be safe and happy at home as long as possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Leveraging something that happened to get spur the introduction to the conversation, right? I'll put the notes in the show notes of this podcast. I'll put a direct link to the book if people want to check it out. They can just go to the notes in the show and click the link, and they'll go right to the book.
And Annalee, you also have a newsletter that might be of value for people to check out as well, just while we're talking about that.
Yeah, I actually personally write my newsletter. It's not AI. It's not some virtual assistant.
I guess we have to say that now, right?
And
not
just
AI generated.
Just so you know, I actually am the author of my book. I didn't type something in the computer and it voila appeared as a book. I actually put the time and labor and blood, sweat, and tears in it. So I'm an actual author, not an AI author. So just thought I'd throw that out there in this day and age. AI. It's like the real deal. It's genuine and authentic. But I wanted to just point out too, because the reason I wrote The Invisible Patient, the emotional, financial, and physical toll on family caregivers, is because you can imagine in the 30 some years I've been working with families, that's thousands of families. And all of the families, because it really usually is the adult kids, because they're like, "Ugh, I can't keep taking PTO, or I burned through all of my FMLA, or my husband is threatening to leave me because I'm not present in my marriage anymore, or I have my own special needs child and I can't just keep flopping over to Arizona or Florida or wherever the parents are." And so I wrote the book because I've literally had thousands of adult kids say, look, I love mom and dad, but like their care needs are killing me. They're causing me depression, anxiety. I try to sleep at night, and as soon as I close my eyes, I'm like, oh my gosh, is dad okay? Did he fall? Did he take his meds? Did he miss his doctor's appointment? How is mom holding up? There's just this ongoing angst. And so most of the adult kids, they'll even say on our, when they leave me a voice message to get on my calendar for their free consult, they'll say, I'm in therapy and it's really because of my parents' needs, and I don't know how to juggle everything. And then I got the pressure of my husband who wants me to be present in the marriage and do stuff with our own family, and I just don't have the energy. Then we also have the financial toll. My typical son or daughter is spending $20,000 out of pocket, and that's just in airfare the year before they hire us for an aging plan. Because if you live in wherever you live and you have to get somewhere else on an airplane the next day because dad had a stroke, it's not $69 on a Frontier. It's like $1,000 at a pop. And so that 20 grand is just airfare. That's not car rentals because you can't drive mom and dad's car because they don't have one or it's all dented. That's not staying in a hotel, or that's not counting hotel because you can't stay at mom and dad's because it smells like a nursing home because they don't have enough supports in place. That's just airfare. And that's not the every time you have to sheepishly call your boss and say, look, my dad fell again, I need to take the next 2 weeks off. So that is just airfare. The other day I had a son who was telling me that when he has to be down to check on his parents, it costs him $7,000 a week every single time he has to miss work. So these are real numbers from like real life scenarios. And so that alone is costing people more than what an actual aging plan would cost, right?
Yeah.
And then the physical toll of people getting hurt, because they don't know how to safely transfer dad,
Right.
or mom is dad's primary caregiver and dad's 6'4" and she's a tiny little thing and they both fall.
It's not practical. Yeah. If they fall on you, what happens, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Another option that many families employ, happened in our family at one point, is, if there's one parent especially, okay, let's move mom in
Yes.
and we can take care of her. We have time for that. Talk about the burnout and the hazards or
Yeah.
downsides to that option.
The downsides that people don't think about are, we'll just use, because I'm in Florida, right? So we'll use hurricane season. So I have all these adult kids who will fly their parent up to get out of harm's way for the hurricane. So usually about 3 to 4 days after the hurricane, my phone blows up because all these people who are like, no, mom and dad are going to age in place at home come hell or high water, and that's just what it's going to be. Then we don't want to put a plan in place. I'm like, okay, well, just keep my number because you'll need it. And so my phone always blows up after there's a hurricane or after there's a tornado or an earthquake or any of those kind of things. And this is why, because the kids bring their parents in for, whether it's short term, that they always think, well, it's just temporary until we figure out what to do. And then a year later, they're still living there. And so what happens is adult kids find out much too late that they bit off more than they can chew. And so they didn't realize, because they aren't there all the time. They didn't realize mom can't make it to the bathroom, or they didn't realize that dad really truly is confused and he has his days and nights mixed up. And dad was here for 4 days before we realized he's not taking his medication and he's like off the walls. Or my house isn't senior safe. We have stairs. We live in a split foyer, or we don't have a downstairs bathroom, and we didn't realize mom was so weak that she can't do stairs and stuff. So families make these knee-jerk reactions, and then what happens is psychosocially, like
Right.
emotionally, the problem is, how do you undo that? And so people, and this is why we do the work that we do with Care Right with our families, our clients, is because it's like my job and my team's job is make sure families are making informed decisions. So it's like, okay, if you move mom and dad in, what is your exit strategy? It's kind of like a business. Okay, you're
Mhm.
going to start a business, but what's your exit strategy, and what conversations have you had? Like, who's going to pay for what?
Mhm.
Mm.
Who's going to help out? I can tell you 9 times out of 10, we as kids assume that our siblings are going to help out, only to find out that they may not. And then what are you going to do? And then that's also why I
Yeah, the
do.
other siblings or family members think it's solved, right?
That's right, because they're like,
Right.
oh, well, she's a retired nurse, so
Yep.
she's got all this time on her hands. Well, maybe that's not how she wanted to spend her retirement,
Right.
right? Or you've got relationship issues. There's a lot of adult kids who maybe don't even like their parents, and here they have them living with them. Or the spouse is like, look, we're in over our heads. We have no marital privacy anymore. Or if you still have little kids, mom is like, how come you're not parenting those kids? Or maybe mom and dad brought a dog with them and the dog is like a disaster. There's just a lot of things. And so, we educate families about what is your exit strategy, what conversations have you had before you made that decision. And the problem is most of them don't. They're just like, oh, well, the hospital told us we had to bring dad somewhere and we couldn't get him into a facility. So we brought him back home to us, and now it's been 2 years, and I'm about ready to get a divorce and crack because I'm that stressed out. So we take families through a whole process of just making informed decisions. It's okay to have a renter's agreement. It's okay to say, look, mom and dad, we're going to have quarterly check-ins, just like at work. You would have a quarterly quality assurance meeting with your team. What's working from your perspective? What's not working well? If you're going to stay here, we need to do these 5 things. You're going to need to say yes to bringing in home care. We're going to have, you're going to have to pay for this or whatever. And then you think about 2 other issues that hits families everywhere. What if you're an only child? Then
Mhm.
what? So there's a whole process we can take families through that are
Right.
an only child. And then you've got the whole blended families. You've got Ethel and Marvin who married later in life. The adult kids of both of them don't really know each other because they've been married like 7 years and they're in their 80s. Well, now Marvin has, dementia, and Ethel is trying to take care of him. And then Ethel's kids are like, look, we don't really know your dad and we don't really know you guys, but we're not going to have my mom. We're not going to have our mom jeopardize her health because of your
Sure.
dad's issues. And so what are we going to do?
Yep. It's all
Yeah,
real,
very
all real
complicated.
stuff.
Yeah.
Why we do what we do, though, because families they truly do. You as family members, there's so much. That's why the aging plan, there's about 25 different components, because it's not like we're writing out a shopping list for Target, right? We're not writing down, the grocery list. This is like aging, caregiving, dementia education, so that these families are actually making smart decisions and informed decisions and well thought out decisions. Even if they're in crisis already, that's okay. We can still help you. It's just that your options aren't going to be as as great potentially as if you plan ahead. It's just like with anything else in life. If you don't plan ahead and you're willy-nilly about it, you're going to get willy-nilly responses and outcomes, right?
Annalee, we've talked a lot about the individual and the families and all that and why your services would be so valuable. Can you share some commentary on the broader view here, meaning the outlook or the landscape of the industries
Yeah,
and institutional settings that may or may not be available and what you think of each one?
it's pretty. I mean, this hurts my heart to say this because my entire career has been devoted to families and our senior care industry. But in my 30 years, I have never seen healthcare so sideways. And so
Mm.
what I mean by that is the pandemic really, I mean, we were struggling before with trying to find good quality workers, but the pandemic certainly did not help because we lost a lot of really seasoned, quality, good leadership and
Right. A lot of
executive
people called it
directors
in. Yep.
and
I'm done.
administrators, and they're like, I'm done. I
Right.
know where healthcare is going, and I want to leave my career on a high note. A lot of people did that. And so a lot of these care communities are going weeks and months without consistent, quality, trained, seasoned leadership. There's a facility just down the street that's memory care unit. In the year and a half that we had a client there, they had 5 different executive directors. And what's happening too is, all industries are facing this. We have an older population, the financial services industry, the airline industry, we're all aging out. And so these young whippersnappers take their nursing home administrator classes and their assisted living classes and stuff. And then they get out and they have this, how it was when we were young. We're like, oh, the whole world is romantic and everything is perfect. Well, then they get out in the real world and get jobs in these facilities. And they're like, oh my God, like, what did I get myself into? Like, it is a disaster. And so the other challenge that families might not know about is, a lot of these care communities are short-staffed. And when there's short-staffed issues, the care is obviously going to be compromised, right? Mom's call light's going to take 2 hours to answer if they answer it at all. And so what these care communities will do is they'll contract with agency or registry workers and to fill the shifts. Well, these are not people who know the residents. They're just there to fill the shift so that the facility remains in compliance with the state mandates of like resident to employee ratios. But families don't understand that. And so you can't assume that just because you're paying $15,000, $16,000, $18,000 a month in care in a facility that they're actually being properly taken care of and tended to. And so we also do patient advocacy, and we teach our families how to be bold advocates, because if you're not there and you're not addressing these issues as they come up, there are way too many premature deaths. There's way too many falls that are happening because the staff aren't available, they're not trained, or they don't take patient care seriously. The other thing that people don't think about is, the people who are making our healthcare rules and regulations don't know what they're doing. And so what that means is, like in memory care in Florida, for example, they are required to keep the memory care unit, like the residence unit, their door closed for fire safety, right? So now you've got the most vulnerable population who is notorious because they're there because they have memory impairment, right? And so they're there because they're a high fall risk, they're wandering, they don't remember to use their walkers. But the facilities are required to keep those memory care unit doors shut. And so the staff don't know that someone fell in their room or that they're walking without a walker because the door is closed.
Right.
So there's just a lot of things families need to think about.
So it comes across, it's evident you're passionate about what you do. You help so many families. There's a lot you're dealing with, trying to help people either in crisis or try to prevent the problems that arrive with crisis. With being remote, how do you find that you're able to identify which facilities are good ones to make use of and which ones are not? You mentioned, your organization works more virtually.
Yep.
And elaborate on that a little bit, because I think that would be a challenge for how you would help in some of these instances.
Yep. So the care matrix, and like I said, all of our services are remote since 2011. So what we do is, through the course of the family meetings, we're gathering the information that we need to know so that we can then put the aging plan in place, make sure that they have their digital grab and go binder and all their accounts, passwords, all that kind of stuff that they know that they have to have that in order. The care matrix, though, will say, okay, well, mom and dad live in Tucson, Arizona. You 4 kids live in 4 different states. Where does it make sense? If mom and dad can't remain in Arizona, where's the next location? Where does it make sense for them to live? And so then we do all the due diligence, the market research. And so we're gathering the room plan, the floor plans, looking at the state surveys. What amenities do they offer? What levels of care do they offer? And it's a side-by-side comparison so that families are not wasting their time just randomly and blindly touring different care communities or just randomly having to call home care companies to say, do you have staff and how much do you charge and what are your shift minimums?
And some
All
of
of
these
that.
places are compensated in a way that's commission in effect, right? With the placement.
Some of the aggregators, yeah. Like you see the ad on TV for, I
Oh,
need help with my family member.
oh
All
yeah, so
this, yeah.
those are called placement companies.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we're fee for service, so we care about our clients' outcomes. Those placement companies, their business model is, hey, we have Ethel here. She's got $200,000 who has an open bed because she needs assisted living. So it's kind of what I call the senior auction or senior trafficking, because there's no family meetings, there's no white glove approach. It's a transaction, and then they move on to the next family. But then if Ethel complains about how she's being taken care of, if they even follow up with her, they'll be like, "Oh, you're not happy where you're at? No problem. We'll just get you in this other facility." And then they get the kickback from the facility.
Sure.
So the downside of that is that A, it's a transaction. B, it's commission based. So they're going to just send you or your loved one wherever there's an open bed that they're going to get the highest kickback from, even if, say there's a better care community, that would be a much better fit. But if they don't have a contract with them, they're not going to make that referral. So and the problem is it's not a regulated industry. And so there's a lot of challenges. You probably know about A Place for Mom. There's like a lot of litigation going on with that type of business model. And that's why, because there's a lot of ethical problems with that business model. So we're fee for service, just like a fee for service financial planner. We care about your outcomes, and it truly is about the relationship, because most of our clients do stay on services to then implement the aging plan and then provide them the advocacy, the ongoing education about dementia and caregiver burnout, and all the way through end of life.
Excellent.
Annalee, I always love talking to you because you pack so much in a short amount of time. There's a lot to all of this.
And you can tell that you just care about your clients.
I do.
It's obvious. After so many years, to have that passion is unique.
It is unique, and that's the challenge is, but that's why we're losing so many good quality healthcare workers that are staying in that broken healthcare American, corporate America. They're burned out. And so I'm always like, hey, if you still love helping people, let's start your own healthcare consultancy company, because the passion is going to be there, and it's just the model is broken.
Yep.
We're so glad to have had you with us. I want to just remind everyone, right? So jot down Care Right Inc. Annalee Kruger. You can get her newsletter, start getting information. You may well want to get an aging plan for yourself or a family member, and that matrix you were talking about, to really get a game plan in place so that you're not one of those families that is in crisis when things emerge, which, let's face it, the more we do aging, the greater the risk that that's going to be an issue.
Yep.
So check that out. You can learn more by checking out her book, The Invisible Patient, available on Amazon. We'll have the link in the show notes. And Annalee, great having you with us. Thanks for being here. Got to have you back more often.
Thank you so much. This was great. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for tuning into the Care Right podcast. We hope today's discussion has provided you with valuable insights. If so, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with others who might find it helpful. Remember, Care Right is more than just a podcast. It's a community dedicated to supporting family caregivers with comprehensive care planning, crisis management, and resources for every stage of aging. Stay connected with us for future episodes as we continue to explore essential topics in aging planning, elder care, and financial planning. Until next time, take care, plan wisely, and remember, you're not alone in your caregiving journey.